Omnivorous with another quick commander deck tech. I say quick commander deck tech, I tend to ramble. Anyway, this deck I've got for you is just Sacrifice Value using the Kodama, the West Tree, and Tevesh Zat. With our Sacrifice outlets, we're gonna get value from Aristocrat and Death Effects, and of course get some big value, because why not? Because, you know, the Kodama is just, that's what it does. It swings the big dick value. If you're digging my content and videos, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It's one quick click, but it helps quite a bit. So let's take a look at our commanders, starting with the Kodama. It is a 6/6 with reach for 4 and 2 green, and it has whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. So basically, everything you do is double the value. You play a land, you can get another land onto the battlefield. You play some super thick threat that starts the balls of sweating at the commander table, and then you get to double it. Super effective when you happen to get the threat from your deck instead of your hand. Now, I do like the Kodama all by itself, but it does have the partner ability, which lets us partner it with another commander with the partner ability. So, we're gonna partner it with Tevesh Zat. Tevesh Zat, Doom of Fools, costs 4 and a black, and he's a planeswalker with 4 loyalty that pluses for 2, that gives you 2 0/1 black Tholes, whatever the hell a Thole is, troll, whatever the fuck. And then you can also +1, you may sacrifice another creature or planeswalker. If you do, you draw 2 cards, and then you draw another card if the sacrifice permanent was a commander. We're not really gonna be sacrificing our commander, but it does also have this other ability saying, if you -10, you gain control of all commanders, put all commanders from the command zone onto the battlefield under your control, basically allowing us to then use the +1 to sacrifice the commanders that aren't ours if we don't want them. Really what we're doing here is we're making sacrifice fodder with his +2 more often than not, and then we will get some card value and some draw off of his +1 to draw us 2 cards on occasion. But really, we are doing the sacrifice fodder. Now, the great thing about his sacrifice fodder, when he shits out his 2 little dudes for us, is he also will trigger our Kodama and allow us to play 2 extra lands from hand if we happen to have them. We are hitting all of those cylinders of sacrifice and value. Alright, so now let's take a look at some of the sacrifice effects that we're going to use to start the value train going. First up is Viscera Seer and Woe Strider. Both of them allow you to sacrifice a creature to scry 1. The Woe Strider will also create 2 0/1s, and it can even come back from the dead, but really being able to scry consistently is where it's at. Carrion Feeder and Yawgmoth Thran Physician will also sacrifice creatures at will. Yawgmoth does cost life, but he does give you lots of card advantage and starts picking off some problem creatures, whereas the Carrion Feeder just gets huge and with little effort and no need for juicing. Before we get to our best sacrifice outlets, we're going to talk about Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact, which should go in any kind of sacrifice deck because they say whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. So since we're going to be sacrificing a lot of fodder, it'll be clearing the way for our big stuff easily. Alright, moving on to the good stuff. We've got Razaketh the Foul-Blooded and Fiend Artisan. Razaketh is an 8/8 flying trampler for 5 and 3 black, and he just happens to have pay 2 life and sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. Basically, he lets you go through your deck and grab any card you want at the expense of 2 life and just a fodder creature, which is what this deck does. He's amazing. Fiend Artisan is also no slouch. It costs 2 hybrid green-black. That means you can pay either green or black for both of its mana symbols. This 1/1 Nightmare gets +1/+1 for each creature in your graveyard. It also has pay X and 1 green or black, then tap and sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a creature card with a converted mana cost X or less. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Alright, huge fucking wall of text. Basically, it lets you sacrifice useless creatures to get better creatures from your deck, which is amazing. And then there's the All-Star. This guy is so good that it just got a reprint, and it's still a $50 card. That is Phyrexian Altar. Very simple and straightforward. Sacrifice a creature, get a mana of any color. So we've already looked at our free sacrifice outlets. Let's take a look at some sacrifice effects that will give us lots of value off of killing our stuff. Proteon Hulk is a 6/6 beast for 5 and 2 green that has, when Proteon Hulk dies, search your library for any number of creature cards with total converted mana cost 6 or less and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And what better way to trigger our Hulk than sacrificing him to Diabolic Intent, our mini version of Razaketh. For 2 mana, we sacrifice a creature and look through our library for any card that we want and put it into our hand. We can sacrifice fodder to get cards at instant speed using Village Rites and Deadly Dispute. Dispute does cost 1 more, but it does also bank us a treasure. Giving us consistent draw when our stuff dies is Erebos. Whenever a creature dies, we can pay 2 life and draw a card off of him, and then he happens to be a 5/6 indestructible if we happen to have enough devotion to him. And of course, the ideal of this deck is to sacrifice fodder to upgrade to much bigger and better things. So what better way to do that than use Evolutionary Leap, Natural Order, or Eldritch Evolution. Evolutionary Leap is great because it actually works at instant speed, but it is a little random because you just sacrifice a creature and reveal cards from the top of your deck until you get another creature, and that's the card that you get to your hand. Natural Order will let you sacrifice a green creature to search your library for a green creature and put it onto the battlefield. Even with these limitations, it'll get the job done. And Eldritch Evolution will sacrifice any creature and then search your library for a creature that costs 2 more than it and put it onto the battlefield. And we have one of our best payoffs, that's gonna be Victimize. Victimize lets you sacrifice a creature to reanimate 2 other creatures. This is really good. It actually works really well with Kodama because you'll reanimate 2 creatures from your grave and then put 2 things from your hand onto the battlefield. Alright, so we've taken the train to Value Town. Let's start bleeding out our opponents with some Aristocrat Effects. For those who haven't achieved the mega fucking nerdy level that I have, Aristocrat Effects are effects that will hit our opponents every time we have a creature die. And probably the most iconic of those Aristocrat Effects are the Zulaport Cutthroat and the Blood Artist. Zulaport Cutthroat hits your opponents for 1 for every creature that you control dies. Now the Blood Artist is a little different. It doesn't hit every opponent, it does target, but it cares about all creatures, so your opponent's creatures will also trigger the artist. Following up those 2, we have Sir Conrad, the Grim, and the Poison-Tipped Archer. Sir Conrad is a little different. He has whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. So he's like the Aristocrat on steroids. Now, Poison-Tipped Archer is really nice. It has whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So it is the best of both worlds with the Zulaport Cutthroat and the Blood Artist, being able to count all of our opponent's creatures and hit everybody. We have 2 enchantments that work really well with Bastion of Remembrance and the Meat Hook Massacre. When the Bastion enters, it creates a 1/1 human soldier for us. Then it has when a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. With the Meat Hook Massacre, you can actually kill all the creatures on the board if you pay into it. Then it has when a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. When a creature an opponent controls controls dies, you gain 1 life. So it's a little odd, it's a little different, but it is super effective. Another really great card is Ceravec Deathbringer. This guy isn't an aristocrat, but he does punish our opponents if they don't have stuff leave the battlefield on their turn. It has, at the beginning of each player's end step, if no permanent left the battlefield this turn, that player loses X life, where X is Ceravec's power. Tabarak's Hope's Demise isn't a aristocrat himself, but he does have, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Tabarak's. If that creature was a cleric, you may draw a card. If you do, lose a life. Pawn of Ulamog is a great card for this deck because he has, whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature. It has sacrifice this creature and create 1 colorless mana. And of course, I saved the best for last. It's the Pityless Plunderer. Why did Wizards print this guy? He is ridiculous. He says, whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure. So if we're sacrificing worthless thralls, we get treasure. If we're sacrificing anything, we get treasure. If we happen to have all of our stuff get killed, we get treasure. So we've satisfied the gods with all of our sacrificing things. Now let's take a look at some of our big value payoffs that really make this deck pop. We've got Beladros Witherbloom. This is the best of the Elder Dragons from the most recent set of Elder Dragons. She's a 4/4 flyer for 7 that has, at the beginning of each upkeep, she creates a 1/1 black-green pest, but when it dies, it gives you a life, and then you can pay 10 life to untap all your lands, and you can only do this once per turn, but that's all you really need if you're getting a ton of value off of the untap. 3 of our best threats are going to be Sheoldred, the Whispering One, the Ancient Brass Dragon, and Hogok, Arisen Necropolis. Sheoldred has, at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. She also happens to have Swamp Walk and is a nice big ol' 6/6. Ancient Brass Dragon has, whenever Ancient Brass Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put any number of target creature cards with total mana value X or less from graveyards onto the battlefield under your control, where X is the result. And it's good to note it says graveyards, so you can hit your opponent's stuff too. Neat. And Hogok, Arisen Necropolis, is an 8/8 trampler that says you can't spend mana to cast this spell. It also has Convoke and Delve. You can also cast Hogok from your graveyard if you want to. So he's a big threat that keeps coming back, and he gets to trigger the Kodama when he does. Avenger of Zendikar is a classic for Commander. People should be used to seeing this card at this point. It has, when Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 plant creature token for each land you control. It also has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. Now, this shit gets ridiculous with our Kodama because he'll enter, he'll create all of his little plant buddies, and then his plant buddies will trigger the Kodama, which lets you put lands from your hand, if you happen to have them, onto the battlefield, buffing all the little plant shits up. Now they're actually big ol' threats on top of being a lot of them. Moving on, we're gonna look at something different, and we're gonna get some value from token generators instead, starting with Chatterfang Squirrel General. Now, if you don't know Chatterfang, he has, if you were to create 1 or more tokens, you create that many tokens and get that many squirrels as well. So every time we get a throw, we'll get some squirrel. And he just happens to work really well with the Pityless Plunderer, which will create a token every time you have a creature die. So you get a squirrel token and a treasure token, and you can sacrifice the squirrel token and get a treasure token. And yeah, it gets pretty ridiculous really quickly. likely. 3 other cards great for their token shenanigans are going to be the Tireless Tracker, Killer Service, and the Tireless Provisioner. Tireless Tracker and Provisioner have very similar abilities. Tireless Tracker has, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate, which means create a clue. Tireless Provisioner has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food or treasure token. Both these ladies have some shenanigans with our commander. Again, the Kodama will trigger whenever their tokens enter the battlefield, letting you put more land onto the battlefield, which will trigger and create a token, which if you have another land, you can put more land onto the battlefield until you're all out of land from hand. Killer Service reads, when Killer Service enters the battlefield, create a number of food tokens equal to the number of opponents you have. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay 2 and sacrifice a token. If you do, create a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior. This guy lets you trade in all of those thulls and maybe some of the food or treasure or clues that you don't want, and make big ol' 4/4s instead. And of course, since we have all of this treasure and clue token shenanigans, we're going to use the Academy Manufactor to make sure whenever we're creating those tokens, we're getting one of each of them. So the deck is set. We've got our sacrifice, we've got our big stuff, we've got our value engines. Now let's take a look at some utility that is just needed. Since we are based around sacrifice effects and doing a little bit of reanimation shenanigans, we do need to protect our graveyard a little bit, so we have endurance here to help us shuffle our grave back into our library if needed. We can also target an opponent with this and screw up their reanimation plan instead. Speaking of reanimation, we have Animate Dead. This guy's thrown in here because he is a permanent that will reanimate, so he does trigger the Kodama on top of triggering the Kodama again when the creature enters. Helping us pull value from the deck is Pattern of Rebirth and Green Sun Zenith. Pattern of Rebirth has, when enchanted creature dies, that creature's controller may search their library for a creature card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. Same kind of deal with Green Sun Zenith. We pay 1 and X to search our library for a green creature with mana value X or less and put it onto the battlefield, and then we get to shuffle the Zenith back into the library to be used again. Living Death and Academ's Awakening help us reanimate some things that we need after they've been lost. Living Death is really good because it will also make all players sacrifice things that they have. So if there's a particular opponent who is well ahead but doesn't have much in their graveyard, it feels great to get all of your super big bad threats back while at the same time it's killing their board. Damnation has actually just been reprinted, so it dropped a little bit, but it's still like $20. Still worth having, as it is a 4-mana board wipe, destroying all creatures they can't be regenerated. We can pick off trouble permanents with Beast Within and Assassin's Trophy. Beast Within will give your opponents a 3/3 beast in exchange for their permanent, whereas the trophy gives them a basic land from their deck. Helping us draw to keep the value coming is Muldervine Reclamation and Skull Clamp. Muldervine Reclamation says, whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life and draw a card. This is great because we're going to be sacrificing a lot of stuff and just getting more and more value to our hand to be put into play for our Kodama. Skull Clamp's another classic. People shouldn't be surprised to see this here. It has equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. So basically we can pay 1 to put it on something that we don't want or are going to sacrifice, and then we kill it and get to draw 2 cards. Culling Ritual is not actually a board wipe, even though it does destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. It is actually a ritual. That's the main reason to use it, because it will add 1 green or black for each permanent destroyed this way. Since we're going to have a ton of useless tokens, we can make a lot of mana off of the Culling Ritual. And the planeswalkers of this deck are all utility, with Nisa of Shadowed Boughs and Grist the Hunger Tide. So we got our utility to protect our deck, but we still need, of course, ramp to make sure it runs right. Before we get into the proper ramp package, we have Black Market and Oracle of Moldiah. Both these guys are amazing in this deck. Black Market says, whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add 1 black for each charge counter on Black Market. Oracle of Moldiah says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. Then you play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play lands from the top of your library. I've leaned into using 2 mana ramp spells, so we have 3 Visits and Nature's Lore. Both of these guys will search your library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield. Not quite as good, but still awesome, is Rampant Growth and Sakura Tribe Elder. Both of these get a basic onto the battlefield tapped. The Tribe Elder has the added benefit of being a creature, so it can be reanimated or cheated out into play other ways. And we got Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. Oh my god, yes. Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. Are you surprised they're here? No. Okay, cool. Next, we have Golgari Signet and Talisman of Resilience. I'm honestly almost getting tired of seeing these as well. So that's basically the deck, but as always, I did a budget version for people who don't want to shell out nearly $750 for some cardboard. Here are the top 10 budget substitutions for you. We're gonna drop Endurance for the Eldest Reborn. Razaketh, we're gonna drop for the Verdant Force. Ancient Brass Dragon comes out and Command the Dreadhorde comes in. Green Sun Zenith gets cut for Vivian's Arcbow. Phyrexian Altar is removed for Whisper Blood Liturgist. The Meat Hook Massacre gets cut for Cut of the Prophets. Grave Pact is removed for Butcher of Malakir. Agadeem's Awakening is removed for Entreat the Dead. Diabolic Intent comes out for Illicit Shipment. And Yawgmoth gets yeeted for Yahenni. And that'll do it for the deck. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you love sacrificing things for value, making your opponents sacrifice things, and hey, let me know what you thought of the deck. Maybe it's better as a Chatterfang deck? Nah, I already got a Chatterfang deck. Why would I want to? That's it for me. Y'all stay hungry, and thanks for watching.
You got the point, I'm gonna bust your balls!